The scent of fresh rosemary buns started it all, the exact kind Ellis loved. It ended on the marble steps of my childhood home. Inside the grand foyer of the Wheeler estate, I clutched the last suitcase I intended to take. My grandfather had left me everything: the house, his company, the full $12 million inheritance. The will was explicit, but clarity meant nothing to those determined to rewrite it. Put it down. My mother's heels struck the polished floor like verdicts. Genevieve Wheeler hadn't eaten a bun, or anything requiring a plate, in over a decade. "You can't take that," she stated. "These are my things," I replied, my grip tightening on the suitcase handle. "The house and all its contents are under legal review," my father said, materializing beside her. "Until the courts rule, you have no claim. It's best you leave now." Then Celeste descended the staircase, silk pajamas whispering, a smile of serene satisfaction on her face. "Running away, Kelly?" I said nothing. I turned toward the door. "Don't you dare turn your back on us, you ungrateful little wretch." Genevieve's shriek sliced the air. Before I could respond, my father lunged. His hand fisted in my hair and wrenched me backward. My skull snapped, the world flashed white. Then speed. I was dragged, my shoes skidding uselessly on the parquet. I registered their faces one by one, a cold gallery of stares. I did not scream. Not once. They craved hysterics, something their lawyer could shape into proof of instability behind closed doors. I gave them only silence, calculated and calm. Outside, the rain was a cold, relentless torrent. He shoved me out. The suitcase sailed after, exploding against the wet flagstone, scattering my possessions. "You are not welcome here," he said, straightening his cufflinks. Genevieve folded her arms. "Return, and it's trespassing." Celeste observed from the doorway, a queen leaning against her palace frame. Slowly, I gathered my soaked things and stood. My head pulsed, but my pride held firm. "You'll regret this," I said, my voice barely carrying over the rain. "Maybe not today, but you will." And I left. I walked away from their house, from that manufactured life, toward the only person who remembered me before I was taught to disappear. Celeste possessed a radiance that required no effort, a born star under a permanent spotlight. For her 16th birthday, a white convertible awaited her on the lawn, dwarfed only by the giant red bow on its hood. A chorus of approving applause rose from our wealthy guests. I stood at the back of the crowd, holding a plastic cake knife no one had handed me. A week later, she wrapped that car around a lamppost. Our parents cited inadequate municipal lighting. That same year, my straight-A report card earned me a $50 gift card. "Celeste is our star," Genevieve would declare at every charity gala, a statement offered as immutable fact. When Celeste failed biology, they secured a tutor whose hourly rate surpassed a teacher's daily salary. When I won first place in the state mathematics championship, my father glanced up from his phone just long enough to ask, "Is that, like, a numbers thing?" They didn't hate me. It was subtler, more complete than that. I was ambient noise. A necessary brushstroke in the background of the family portrait, meant to add depth without attracting the eye. Except for one person. Ellis Wheeler, my grandfather, resided in the East Wing among towers of books and the scent of old leather. His character was as steadfast and unyielding as the oak in his study. "Well, hello, bright eyes," he'd greet me, his attention absolute. "Tell me something new." Our Saturdays belonged to the Eleonora, his aging but graceful yacht. "The sea doesn't care who your parents are," he'd say, transferring the wheel's solid weight to my hands. "It only respects confidence and competence." He taught me to read the wind, to adjust the sails, to find my footing when the bow crashed into a swell. He schooled me in patience, in the understanding that true progress is often a slow, unseen current. Later, the lessons shifted to other deep waters: stock tickers, boardroom politics, the ebb and flow of capital. In his study, he'd sketch diagrams on yellow legal pads, explaining hostile takeovers and fiduciary duty with the same meticulous care he once used to demonstrate a proper knot. "You have a builder's mind," he observed one afternoon. "Your sister only knows how to sparkle." But sparkle fades, Callista. Structure endures. I was 16. I grasped the compliment, but not its full gravity. I would only comprehend it completely on the day he summoned me to his study, fixed me with a look that bypassed all pretense, and told me his decision was final. Charles North's voice was a soft, measured instrument in the wood-paneled library. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, laying golden rectangles across the floor where our family had once smiled for magazine spreads. Today, there were no cameras. Only a silence so dense it felt like another presence in the room. Charles cleared his throat and read. To my granddaughter, Callista Wheeler, I leave the controlling interest in Wheeler Holdings, the house in Grayson Hollow, and all property contained therein. The silence that followed wasn't an absence of sound, but a force of its own. I saw its impact first in the fracture of my mother's composure. Her society page smile solidified into a grimace. Her fingers whitened around the stem of her crystal glass. My father blinked, slow and deliberate, twice, as if rebooting his vision. Celeste simply stared at Charles, her expression one of pure, uncomprehending blankness. Charles continued, his tone unchanging. To Celeste Wheeler, I leave a fixed trust of $2 million, to be paid in equal installments over a period of 10 years. A choked noise escaped Celeste, a hybrid of a laugh and a gasp. $2 million. A stipend. An afterthought. My mother was on her feet. This is an error. He couldn't have. His mind was compromised. No, I said, the word quiet but clear in the stifling air. You just weren't listening. My father said nothing. He reclined in his leather chair, his eyes narrowing into slits as he stared into the middle distance, visibly recalculating the entire trajectory of his future. Charles droned on, listing minor bequests, charitable donations, a painting to the museum. It was all static. The entire world had been reconfigured in 2 paragraphs. When it was done, they moved around me as if I were furniture, a long crooked painting on the wall that was now, inconveniently, the focal point. They did not speak to me. Later, passing my father's study, I caught the hissed conversation behind the door. She manipulated him. My mother's voice was venomous. All those hours in his study, filling his head. He was vulnerable. You saw the prescriptions. I'll speak with Charles, my father replied, his tone all cold strategy. We have time. We just need the correct legal precedent. I didn't wait to hear more. Upstairs, in the solitude of my room, I opened the notebook my grandfather had entrusted to me. Inside the front cover, in his firm, elegant script, was a single line of preparation. If they come for you, it means they've already lost. Just hold the line. The campaign began with minor aggressions. The motion sensor light outside my bedroom door ceased to recognize me. The staff averted their eyes, their greetings dying before they reached their lips. The East Wing, my grandfather's sanctuary and now mine, carried the faint, persistent trace of my mother's Chanel No. 5. Then, the lock on my office was changed. I found Peterson, the butler, polishing silver. Do you know what's happening with my office? I asked. He offered a smile so tense it looked painful. Your father has instructed enhanced security protocols, miss. The digital dismantling was more thorough. My access codes to the house systems were revoked. My laptop rejected my password twice before grudgingly allowing me entry. Inside, the folders were ransacked. Transition plan. Contingencies. Gone. The recycle bin was pristine. The server logs showed a login from Charles North's administrative account, but the time and date fields were a clean, digital blank. I brought it up at dinner, the words feeling foolish as I said them aloud. My father dissected his steak with unnerving focus. Stress can distort perception, Callista. You should consider speaking with someone. Dr. Mendelsohn was invaluable to your mother. I'm not imagining it. My mother stirred her broth, the spoon barely making a sound. Grief has its own language, darling. It can make us see things that aren't there. The next morning, my grandfather's leather-bound ledger lay on the kitchen island, ripped neatly in 2. The housekeeper pretended not to hear my question, her attention welded to the sink. The nights introduced a new ritual, the slow, deliberate tread of footsteps halting outside my door. They were too measured for a busy servant. I would yank the door open to an empty hallway. I started using the lock. Soon, fresh, silvery scratches marred the brass around the keyhole. The final, brazen act was witnessing it myself. I walked into the estate's legal office and found Charles North at the copier, sheets of my grandfather's medical records spooling into the tray. He didn't startle. "Just streamlining the files for the probate review," he said, his professional smile intact. "Your father's request." That evening, the envelope waited on my pillow. Inside was a photocopy of a prescription from 2 months before Ellis's death. At the bottom, in handwriting I knew from a lifetime of memos and notes, was an addendum: patient exhibits marked fatigue. Observe for potential signs of undue influence. It was not a doctor's script. It was my father's. I sat on the edge of my bed, the cold paper in my hand, and opened my grandfather's notebook. "Just hold the line." The words had shifted from advice to prophecy. Now I understood. This wasn't just about disinheritance. It was erasure. And they had only just begun. The intercom buzzed at 7 a.m., a harsh, electronic sound in the silent morning. Peterson's voice was stripped of its usual deference. "A family meeting has been convened." The dining room. The tone was that of a bailiff issuing a summons, which, in effect, it was. I already knew the verdict before I entered. Genevieve presided at the head of the table, her knuckles white where they clutched the pearls at her throat. Roland stood just behind her right shoulder, a sentinel, his pretense of neutrality abandoned. Celeste was a study in detached anticipation, slouched in a window seat, her focus on her phone screen. Charles North completed the tribunal, his closed briefcase and blank notepad signaling that the real business had already been concluded elsewhere. "A motion has been filed to delay the probate transfer," Charles announced, his voice smooth. Roland filed it, citing significant concerns regarding Ellis's testamentary capacity in his final months. "Pending review, control will remain with the family trustees." "What did the court say?" I asked, my voice steady. Genevieve's smile was a thin, surgical cut. "The court recognized the validity of our concerns. And until this unpleasantness is resolved," she continued, the word unpleasantness dripping with disdain, "it would be best for all if you were not in residence." My insides turned to stone. "You're evicting me." "You are at liberty to go wherever you wish," Charles clarified, his tone soft, lethal. "However, the estate is now under a protective order. You have until noon to vacate." Roland delivered the deadline like a judge passing sentence. Discussion closed. Upstairs, I moved with a speed born of cold fury, packing only what was irreplaceable. As I reached the bedroom door, suitcase in hand, she was there. A blockade in silk. "You will not remove property that is no longer yours," Genevieve stated, her eyes slits. "These are my clothes. Everything here is part of the contested estate." I tried to step past her. She didn't move. "Roland," she called, and he was there in moments. He didn't speak. His hand closed over the suitcase handle. I held on. His other hand fisted in my hair, close to the scalp, and wrenched. A bolt of pure, white-hot pain. I didn't scream. My body went stiff, a log as he hauled me backward into the hall. The luxurious carpet did nothing to cushion the impact as my shoulder slammed into the doorframe, then the sharp edge of the stair. The world became a blur of pain, the ceiling, their faces. Celeste watched from a shadowed doorway, a silent spectator. Genevieve's eyes were wide, not with horror, but with a fierce, approving intensity. The rain outside was a cold, drowning veil. Roland's final shove sent me stumbling onto the slick stones. The suitcase arced through the air, burst open on impact, scattering my life across the driveway. Simple clothes, the worn leather notebook, my grandfather's gold pocket watch. "You are not welcome here," he said, standing framed in the doorway. I pushed myself up, rainwater streaming from my hair, my sleeves. "You'll regret this," I said, the words barely a whisper yet carrying in the downpour. "Not for the money, but because you assume I won't fight back." I bent, my fingers closing around the cool metal of Ellis's watch, and then I turned and walked, without a backward glance, into the gray, weeping dawn. The rain was a relentless, hours-long purge. Ashley found me after nightfall, a silent rescue in her old Volvo. She didn't comment on the bruise blooming on my collarbone or the dark, delicate crust of blood at my temple. She simply opened the passenger door. The entire drive passed in a wordless communion, her hands fixed at 10 and 2. I spent the night coiled on her sofa under a fleece blanket that smelled of fabric softener. Sleep was impossible. My mind was a courtroom, endlessly prosecuting the same scene: Celeste's passive observation, the cold pressure of my mother's palm against the door, the searing violation of my father's grip. In the bleak light of morning, I inventoried my salvage: phone, the leather-bound notebook, a wrinkled blazer, and the watch. Ellis's watch. He had wound it each evening with sacramental care. A true timepiece doesn't merely tell the hour, he'd told me. It signals the moment for action. Turning it in my hand, the weight felt off, subtly, deliberately denser. My thumb traced the smooth back until it found a hairline seam. I pressed the edges, remembering the specific pressure he used on his desk drawer's hidden latch. Click. The sealed compartment held 2 items: a single folded note on faintly yellowed paper and a slim, black flash drive. The message, in his unwavering script, was brief: "If they've done what I feared, find Kevin Linus on Beacon Hill. He knows what to do." My hands trembled as I inserted the drive into Ashley's laptop. The files within were a meticulously curated arsenal. Scans of every recent medical evaluation, each declaring Ellis to be of perfectly sound mind. Audio files, hours of our conversations, his lessons on corporate governance, his clear, unwavering intentions. There were spreadsheets, accounts both domestic and opaque, networks of assets I never knew he'd structured. One directory was named simply Emergency Funds. Ashley placed a mug of tea beside me. "From him?" she asked softly. I nodded, a lump in my throat. This was more than trust. This was foresight. He had anticipated their betrayal and had spent his final days engineering my countermove. At dawn, I purchased a one-way ticket to Boston. An address in the files was tagged for emergency contact only. My email was just 5 words: "Ellis Wheeler said you would know what to do." Kevin Linus's reply arrived within 3 hours: "Come at once. You are not alone." I closed the laptop lid. And for the first time since the reading of the will, I took a full, deep breath. The battle was mine to fight, but I was no longer unarmed. My grandfather had not just left me an inheritance. He had left me a blueprint for the siege. Kevin Linus met me at the door of his Beacon Hill brownstone with a handshake that was both an assessment and an anchor. He led me to a study where a single cabinet stood, its drawers brimming with sealed, labeled files. Ellis and I hadn't merged companies in 20 years, he said. But we never stopped being allies. He came to me the afternoon he received his diagnosis. Kevin pulled a file free, the contents in my grandfather's distinctive script. He said, "Kevin, I trust my blood about as far as I can throw the East Wing. The only exception is my granddaughter." He then introduced me to Mirabelle Crane. Her demeanor was that of a seasoned litigator, calm, precise, and unshockable. When I recounted the physical eviction, the grip on my hair, the stares, she simply nodded. "Do you have corroborating evidence?" she asked, her voice level. I handed her the flash drive. By nightfall, a strategy was not just forming, it was crystallizing. For the next week, operating from the quiet guest room above Kevin's garage, I watched as their team conducted a forensic autopsy on my family's facade. They dissected server logs, email headers, boardroom audio transcripts. Mirabelle filed the necessary motions, a legal surgeon making the first, precise incision. The structure, so imposing from the outside, began to audibly groan. The first crack was financial. A forensic audit of Wheeler Holdings revealed a series of elegant, fraudulent siphons. Hundreds of thousands had been redirected to AV Consulting, a firm with no address, no staff, and a single principal, Celeste Arden Wheeler. Mirabelle mapped the flow: $500,000 transferred in urgent increments in the quarter following Ellis's death, the same period Celeste was supposedly finding herself at galleries in Florence. Instead, transaction records placed her at high-limit tables in Atlantic City and Las Vegas, the money evaporating almost as fast as it landed. Your sister transitioned from beneficiary to a full-blown liability, Mirabelle noted coolly. They weren't funding a grand tour. They were covering debts. Next, the legal forgery. The medical affidavit questioning Ellis's competence was a clumsy fake. The signature was a traced replica. The digital footprint was incontrovertible. The document was created on Charles North's computer 14 days after my grandfather's funeral. This was premeditated, Kevin observed, his voice grave. They were laying the groundwork before the will was even read. I stared at the falsified page, at the arrogant mimicry of his signature. Their cruelty wasn't born of loss, it was born of a desperate, grasping fear. I was no longer just an heir in their way. I was living evidence of their illegitimacy, and that made me a threat to be neutralized. The final document Kevin presented was a file named Board Ethics, Urgent Matter. It contained quietly filed amendments to the company bylaws, executed by Ellis alone. As I read them, a cold clarity settled over me. The realization was staggering. My parents had never held the reins. Their authority was a performance, a fiction they'd believed themselves. The power had always, quietly, resided elsewhere. The courtroom air was a stale blend of lemon polish and old paper. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, my breathing measured. I had rehearsed this calm the way one rehearses a vital speech. They entered as a fractured unit. Genevieve led in a tailored navy suit and pearls, a performance of dignified affront. Roland trailed a step behind her, a man retreating into his wife's silhouette. Celeste lingered near the door, her gaze fixed on the floor, her mouth a pinched line of dread. Not one of them glanced in my direction. Mirabelle began with a methodical, devastating clarity. She entered the executed will into evidence. Then, the sworn affidavits from Ellis's personal physician, testifying to his unimpeachable mental acuity. Then, she presented the digital exhibit, the forged medical affidavit, its metadata revealing its creation date on Charles North's hard drive 2 weeks post-mortem. Judge Morales's eyebrow lifted a fraction, a silent note of judicial skepticism. Then, Mirabelle played the audio. My grandfather's voice, gravelly and sure, filled the silent room. It was a lesson on convertible bonds, then a pause. Callista is the only one I trust with this legacy, his recorded voice stated, clear as a bell. She doesn't play games. She builds plans. A palpable shift occurred in the chamber. The atmosphere thickened, weighted with the truth of his deliberate choice. Peterson, our former butler, was called next. His voice was subdued but firm. I witnessed Mr. Roland Wheeler drag Miss Callista by her hair from the residence on the morning of the 7th. I regret my prior silence, Your Honor. Finally, Mirabelle cued the video file. On the screen, Ellis Wheeler sat in his study, looking directly into the lens, his expression one of weary resolve. If you are viewing this recording, he said, each word deliberate, then they have attempted to subvert my final wishes. They may attempt to forge documents, but they cannot forge my intent. My will is unchanged. The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum. Judge Morales's ruling was swift. The will was upheld in its entirety. All assets were to be reinstated to the beneficiary, effective immediately. She further referred the matter of the forged affidavit and financial malfeasance for criminal investigation. The reaction was a study in collapse. Genevieve's poised mask shattered, her jaw going slack. Roland's neck and face mottled with a dark, humiliated crimson. Behind them, Charles North's professional composure drained away, leaving him pale and waxen. I felt no tears, no triumphant smile. I simply rose as the judge addressed me. Ms. Wheeler, the court recognizes you as the sole holder of controlling interest in Wheeler Holdings and the legal title holder of the Grayson Hollow estate. The gavel's crack was a period at the end of their sentence. I offered a single, firm nod to the bench, turned, and walked from the courtroom. The ghost of invisibility was gone. I had been witnessed. The formal notice of eviction arrived by courier at dawn. They were granted 30 days, a strict and final deadline, to remove their personal possessions. Everything my grandfather had specifically bequeathed was exempt from their claim. I returned to Grayson Hollow alone. The house felt different. The rooms I had once navigated like a prisoner in a gilded maze now simply held space and silence. The grandeur was no longer intimidating, it was factual. The staff moved with a new, cautious deference, their gazes carefully averted, caught in the limbo between old and new loyalties. I harbored no resentment toward them. Genevieve's calls flashed on my screen 3 times in succession. I let each one ring out. Roland's single email was a masterpiece of bitter, wounded pomposity. I marked it as unread and let it vanish into the archive. Celeste came in person. She appeared at the main gate on foot, unadorned by her usual entourage, holding a small, sleek box. When I met her on the porch, she didn't attempt to cross the threshold. "I'm not here to ask for anything," she said, her voice lacking its customary shine. She extended the box. Inside, resting on a bed of velvet, were Ellis's gold cufflinks, each one meticulously engraved with the 3-masted schooner he'd sailed in his youth. "Father sold them last month. I bought them back." I didn't offer thanks. The gesture wasn't about kindness, it was an artifact of guilt, a small token of restitution from a fellow survivor. But I didn't send her away either. We stood in the hushed twilight, the vast, contested house at my back. "I never knew how to make them stop," she whispered, the confession escaping like a breath held too long. I looked at her, really looked, and saw not my rival, but another casualty of the same war. "I think you did," I replied. She absorbed this, gave a single, shallow nod, then turned and walked down the drive without a backward glance. She did not ask to come inside. That evening, in the deep quiet of the study, I opened the center drawer of Ellis's great oak desk. I placed the cufflinks inside, where they belonged, next to his favorite pen and the stub of a sealing wax candle. Then I closed the drawer and turned the small brass key. The solid click of the lock was the only sound, a final, gentle period at the end of his long, protective sentence.